My name is Blair Donovan. I am 42 years old, and I serve as a lieutenant general in the United States military, specializing in defense intelligence and national security. But to the people gathered behind me, to the family I was born into, I am nothing but a failure, a stain on their perfect legacy. They mocked me for failing. They banned me from our elite university reunion. And yet here, I stand outside the gilded gates of Warrington University, the same place where generations of my family built their name. I stand alone, uninvited, unwanted. And somewhere in the distance, I hear it, the low, unmistakable hum of helicopter rotors cutting through the night air. I don't look back. I don't need to. I already know what's coming. My family, my mother Beatrice, my sister Valerie, my brother Evan, they thought they buried me. They thought I disappeared when I walked away from the life they forced upon me. I let them believe it. Sometimes silence is sharper than any blade. But the past has a way of returning when you least expect it. The hum grows louder, faces turn upward. Glasses still mid-air, the music fades, and then the sky roars. A military helicopter, matte black unmarked, descends over the manicured lawn. The downdraft scatters petals, shakes champagne flutes, tugs at designer gowns. I can feel the shock ripple through the crowd. Whispers rise like smoke. My heart is steady. My breath is calm. Because I've known for years this moment would come. The helicopter touches down. The door slides open. A Pentagon colonel in full dress uniform steps out, his posture sharp, his face unreadable. He does not hesitate. He walks straight toward me through the stunned silence. I had worn like armor for decades. His eyes scanned the crowd only once before locking on me. He crossed the distance in measured, deliberate steps. Each footfall was another crack in the perfect facade of the Donovan family's manufactured legacy. Then he stopped, right in front of me, and without hesitation he brought his right hand sharply to his brow and saluted. "Lieutenant General Donovan, ma'am. The Pentagon requires your immediate presence." The words hit the air like a detonation. I heard the sharp intake of breath from my mother Beatrice, the woman who once told me I would never amount to anything. I saw my sister Valerie freeze her champagne glass, tilting dangerously. My brother Evan's mouth dropped open, words caught somewhere between disbelief and denial. No one moved, no one spoke. The weight of the moment pressed down on all of them while the wind from the helicopter still tugged at their perfect curated lives. And for the first time they saw me. I didn't hesitate. I took a single breath, let it settle deep into my chest, then stepped forward. The sound of my heels on the stone path felt louder than the helicopter itself. I kept my eyes straight ahead, the wind from the blades whipping strands of hair across my face. But I didn't stop to fix it. I didn't stop for anyone. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of Iris Quill, the only person who hadn't looked at me with contempt that night. She moved closer, her voice barely more than a breath against the chaos around us. "They never really knew who you were," she murmured. I didn't turn my head. I didn't need to. My voice came out calm, low, deliberate. Because they never wanted to. I kept walking. The grass shifted beneath my feet. The lights of the ballroom still flickered in the distance. But for me, the night had already changed. The lines that had defined my life, failure and success, belonging and exile, blurred into something new. Something mine. Behind me, the crowd stood frozen. My family, my past, my ghosts. They all remained rooted in place as I moved forward without them, and I didn't look back. Warrington University was more than just a school to my family. It was the cornerstone of the Donovan name, a legacy woven through every stone, every hallway, every gold-plated donor plaque. For generations, Donovans had walked these grounds, my grandfather a renowned federal judge, my father a diplomat, my mother Beatrice, once the youngest dean in the school's history. My sister Valerie followed the script perfectly, graduating top of her class before becoming a federal judge herself. My younger brother Evan was the prodigy, the tech mogul whose face graced magazine covers before he turned 30. Me, I was the mistake. I still remember the exact moment I broke the chain. I was 21, sitting at the same mahogany dining table where every Donovan before me had announced their Ivy League plans. I told them calmly that I had accepted an appointment to West Point. The silence was suffocating. My mother's wineglass trembled slightly in her hand. Valerie's expression froze in that same practiced neutrality she wore on the bench. Evan just laughed, assuming it was a joke. It wasn't. That night I packed my bags in silence. No one stopped me. No one asked me why, because they already knew. To them, military service was beneath the Donovan name. It was a choice that reeked of failure and escape for the mediocre, not a path for the exceptional. I left without looking back. But even after all these years, the weight of their judgment still clung to me. I wasn't just the black sheep. I was the ghost, the one they erased from photo albums, from conversations, from the very walls of Warrington, where the rest of them still basked in spotlight and applause. And yet some ghosts never truly leave. The Donovan family did more than just disapprove of my choice. They erased me. It started small. My name missing from family Christmas cards, the awkward silences whenever someone outside the family asked, "And how is Blair doing these days?" Later it grew colder, sharper. I stopped receiving invitations to weddings, graduations, even funerals. When my father passed away, I wasn't called. I read about the service in the back pages of a local newspaper. My absence was deliberate, surgical. Beatrice, my mother, controlled it all with precision. She built her life on image and legacy. There was no space for a daughter who chose combat boots over courtroom heels. Valerie followed her lead without hesitation, and Evan. Well, Evan was too self-absorbed to care. For them, I had ceased to exist. It wasn't anger, it wasn't grief, it was calculated indifference. And I let it happen. I buried myself in my work and deployments that stretched across continents and conflicts. Afghanistan, Syria, the Horn of Africa. I wore my silence like armor. Every medal, every promotion, every commendation, I earned them in places my family would never dare set foot. But no matter how far I went or how high I rose, I remained the girl they decided to forget. There were no phone calls, no "we're proud of you," no place set for me at the table. Somewhere deep down, part of me still hoped foolishly that one day they'd see me. Not the disappointment, not the failure, just me. But hope can rot when left untended. And so I became a stranger to my own blood. A ghost haunting a family too obsessed with perfection to recognize the daughter they had cast into shadow. The 20-year reunion at Warrington was in every way a spectacle of curated perfection. The grand ballroom glowed under crystal chandeliers, ivory tablecloths, gold-trimmed chairs, champagne towers, everything meticulously arranged to celebrate the so-called excellence of the class of 2003. I wasn't on the guest list. I knew that the moment the glossy invitation failed to arrive, but I came anyway. Not out of spite, not out of revenge, but because some ghosts need to see the ruins they once called home. I wore a simple navy dress. No medals, no uniform, just me. As I stepped through the doors, the air shifted. Heads turned, but no one approached. My mother, regal as ever in an emerald gown, stood center stage. Valerie, flawless in crimson silk, flanked her right. Evan, ever the golden boy, laughed too loudly at some tech investor's joke. They didn't see me at first, or rather, they chose not to. I drifted through the crowd like smoke. Faces blurred. Conversations overlapped in meaningless noise. I heard fragments: IPOs, political campaigns, vacation homes. Success measured only in applause and accolades. And then I saw her off to the side, half hidden near the bar, Iris Quill. I remembered her vaguely sharp mind, sharper pen. She had become a respected journalist, known for exposing corruption in the highest places. She caught my eye, her gaze curious, thoughtful. Unlike the others, she didn't look away. The night unfolded in polished, empty rituals. Beatrice took the stage to deliver her speech on legacy. Valerie spoke of justice and duty. Evan cracked another round of self-congratulatory jokes. The audience clapped on cue. And I stood there, invisible, erased. Iris moved closer, but didn't speak. Not yet. Somewhere deep in my chest, a quiet voice whispered, "This is not my family. Not anymore." I smiled, faint and hollow, and waited for the night to end. Or so they thought. The program resumed as if nothing had happened. As if a military helicopter hadn't just landed on the university lawn. As if I hadn't just been summoned by the Pentagon in front of every single person who once pretended I didn't exist. The string quartet returned to their polished melodies. The servers glided between tables with silver trays of wine and hors d'oeuvres. And then the speeches began. Blair Donovan, my mother, took the stage first. She looked every inch the matriarch emerald gown, flawless posture, the same rehearsed smile that had graced society pages for decades. She spoke of legacy, of leadership, of the Donovan name as a pillar of justice, progress, and civic duty. The crowd ate it up, her words were smooth, but I heard the subtext in every line. Some of us, she said, pausing for effect, have chosen to honor the path laid before us, to build on generations of integrity and excellence. Applause. Next was Judge Valerie Donovan, whose calculated charm mirrored our mother's to perfection. She spoke of the rule of law, of the importance of serving one's country through governance and legal institutions. She name-dropped cases, charities, board memberships. More applause. And then Evan, my brother. He kept it casual, throwing in jokes about tech IPOs and humble beginnings before winking at the crowd with the same smirk he'd had since we were kids. He talked about innovation, disruption, success. Louder applause. Through it all, I sat at the very back alone at a table marked simply as overflow seating. My name wasn't printed on any programs. There was no mention of my service, my sacrifice, or my presence. I was invisible, by design, but not for long. After the speeches, the ballroom dissolved into soft laughter and polite clinking of glasses. Clusters of former classmates mingled beneath chandeliers, while waitstaff floated by with silver trays. I remained at the fringe unnoticed by most until the inevitable happened. Valerie spotted me first. Her expression barely flickered as she approached, her crimson gown sweeping behind her. Blair, she said smoothly, as if tasting the name for the first time in years. I almost didn't recognize you. I forced a thin smile. Most people don't. Evan wasn't far behind. He sauntered over, drink in hand, his grin too wide to be sincere. Well, look who decided to show up. Thought you'd given up on this world of, relevance before I could reply. Beatrice joined us, her perfume hitting before her voice. Darling, she said in a tone that carried knives beneath silk. We were wondering if you'd slipped away again. You always did prefer an exit without a scene. I stayed still, calm, steady. It's a lovely event, I said softly. Valerie tilted her head. And you've been keeping busy somewhere, overseas. I assume she waved her hand vaguely, as if foreign wars were as mundane as weather patterns. Evan chuckled. I thought you dropped out of law school. Or was it something else? Honestly, I lose track. Beatrice didn't even bother to look at me directly. Of course not everyone is built for the pressure of the Donovan standard. Some choose different paths. The words stung, not because they were new, but because they were old, cut from the same script they'd used my entire life. They didn't see me. They never had. To them, I was the mistake who left the daughter who embarrassed them by trading courtrooms for combat zones. I took a sip of water, hands, steady breath even. But inside, the old wound bled fresh. I moved away before the conversation could spiral further. My shoes clicked softly against marble as I slipped toward the edges of the ballroom. The music swelled again, the laughter rose higher, and I disappeared just like they wanted. I stood alone near the tall glass windows, staring out across the moonlit lawn. Somewhere out there, the helicopter still waited, its silent presence more honest than any face in this room. I thought about the countless times I had dreamed of this night, not the glitz, not the glamour, but the moment they would finally see me. See that I had survived more than they could fathom. That my worth wasn't measured by donor plaques or courtroom victories. But that night, as their words still echoed in my mind, I realized something deeper. They didn't just fail to see me. They had never wanted to. I wasn't their disappointment. I was their mirror. I was the living proof that legacy could break, that success could take shapes they neither valued nor understood. And so I let the distance remain. Iris appeared at my side, saying nothing at first. She simply offered me the smallest of nods, the kind that spoke volumes. They don't deserve to know who you are, she murmured. I exhaled long and quiet. I exist whether they choose to see me or not. Her eyes flickered with something close to respect. I smiled faintly, not triumphant, not bitter, just resolved. In that moment, I wasn't the forgotten daughter, the military outcast, the black sheep. I was simply Blair Donovan. And that I realized would be enough. The music played on, oblivious to the quiet war still burning beneath my skin. Laughter swirled through the golden-lit ballroom as champagne flowed and polished smiles never wavered. My family, my mother, my siblings, resumed their charade with unnerving ease. To them, my presence was nothing more than a brief disruption, a ripple on the surface of their curated perfection. But for me, the night unraveled differently. As I stood by the window, distant from the chatter, my mind drifted to places far from Warrington, to dirt roads and desert winds, to landscapes painted in dust and fire. I thought about the mission in Helmand Province, the one they never knew about, the one no headlines ever mentioned. The night our convoy hit an IED and everything I thought I knew about survival changed in less than 3 heartbeats. I still remember the sound less of an explosion and more like the earth itself opening to swallow us whole. I remember crawling through twisted metal, blood in my eyes, the heat of flames licking my back. I remember dragging Sergeant Mendez out of the wreckage, my arms shaking, her screams tearing the night apart. And I remember what came after the silence. No welcome home, no ticker tape parades. Just an empty apartment, stale air, and orders for the next deployment. I thought of Syria. The checkpoint ambush, the boy with the wired vest. His hands were shaking so badly I could see the terror in his eyes even through the grainy drone feed. I gave the order. I still hear the blast in my sleep. And there was Somalia. The night we lost Corporal Reeves because I hesitated half a breath, half a heartbeat too long. His parents never knew the full story. I made sure of that. They were all ghosts I carried. Faces, names, weight. Memories pressed deep into the marrow of my bones. My family spoke of service like it was measured in degrees and court verdicts. But I knew a different kind of service. One that left scars no one applauded. One that demanded silence not because it was noble but because it was necessary. I kept my hands folded as I stood there watching the reflection of the glittering ballroom in the glass. I could see them, Beatrice, Valerie, Evan, laughing easily, glasses raised. They lived in a world where everything was earned through performance, through applause, through curated legacies, handed down like fragile heirlooms. I had walked away from that world, and yet standing there, part of me still ached, not for their approval, not for their acceptance, but for the simple human need to be seen, to be acknowledged, to matter. Even the strongest soldiers carry that need. I adjusted the sleeve of my dress, where the thin silver chain of my West Point ring brushed against my skin. A habit. A quiet reminder of who I chose to become when I walked away from this place. The party swelled louder, the band shifting to something more upbeat. Laughter rose, cameras flashed, and still I stood, invisible in plain sight. Somewhere outside, the low, distant hum of helicopter blades began to stir the air again. Faint, subtle, but rising. And I felt the shift in my bones before anyone else heard it. I knew long before they did that the night was about to change forever. At first they didn't notice. The music drowned out the subtle shift in the air. The hum was faint, distant, blending into the rhythm of laughter and clinking glasses. But I heard it, felt it, the unmistakable low frequency of rotor blades slicing through the sky. My pulse slowed, not quickened. My breath deepened, not stalled. I had heard this sound before in other lives. Other lands, but never here, never in this place built on marble and illusions. The first to react was a waiter. He paused mid-step, silver tray, trembling slightly in his hands. His eyes flickered upward, confusion painted across his face. The murmurs began soft at first, then louder as more heads tilted skyward, more hands shaded eyes from the sudden gust of displaced air. Then came the sound in full, the sky roared. The helicopter emerged over the northern tree line, matte black angular slicing through the manicured calm of the campus. Its floodlights ignited the lawn in harsh white beams, scattering petals, overturning glasses. The quartet stopped playing. Voices faltered mid-sentence. A gust of wind swept through the open doors, pulling at gowns, toppling decorations. The night unraveled. I didn't move. I heard my name murmured at first, then louder as faces turned, whispers rising like smoke. Is that Blair Donovan? What's happening? The helicopter descended the downdraft, flattening the grass, rattling the tent poles. A few guests stumbled back. Someone let out a nervous laugh that died halfway through. And then the final silence, total, absolute, as the rotors slowed just enough for the door to slide open. He stepped out. Colonel Nathan Mercer. I recognized him instantly, though we hadn't spoken face to face in over a year. His uniform was impeccable, his expression unreadable. He moved with precision, the kind of precision that leaves no room for doubt, no margin for error. His boots crunched softly over gravel as he crossed the lawn. Never glancing left or right, eyes fixed solely on me. I could feel every stare behind me, hundreds of eyes widening in real time. Mercer stopped 3 feet away, then without a single wasted breath, he raised his right hand in a crisp, perfect salute. "Lieutenant General Donovan, ma'am, the Pentagon requires your immediate presence." His voice carried over the stunned quiet like a bell toll. I heard the sound of glass breaking sharp and small and turned slightly in time to see my mother, Beatrice, her face drained of color, her fingers slack around the stem of a crystal flute, now shattered on the ground. Valerie stood frozen, her lips parted slightly, eyes flickering as if searching for some rational explanation, some anchor to reality that no longer existed. Evan, my brother, was motionless, his expression slack, mouth ajar, one hand still holding a forgotten drink tilted dangerously. No one spoke, no one breathed. The weight of those 7 words, "The Pentagon requires your immediate presence," hung in the air, thick as fog, irreversible as fire. And still I stood still, calm, steady, letting them absorb it, letting them reckon with what they'd spent 2 decades refusing to see. For the first time, the family that had spent years erasing me couldn't look away, and I didn't flinch. The moment stretched thin, suspended in the charged air between who I had been and who I had become. I felt every pair of eyes locked on me, faces twisted in disbelief. Confusion, something close to fear. But I didn't rush. I didn't stumble. I moved forward with measured steps, each footfall deliberate, each breath steady. The wind from the helicopter still tugged at the edges of my dress, whipping stray strands of hair across my face. But I barely felt it. The noise, the chaos, the weight of so many unspoken words, it all dulled into the same distant hum I'd heard in war zones, where focus narrowed and the world shrank to what mattered. I walked past the tables, champagne still bubbling in abandoned flutes, napkins fluttering in the gale. The faces around me blurred, former classmates, distant acquaintances, people who had once whispered that I would never make it, that I wasn't Donovan material. Now their mouths hung open, too stunned for mockery. Beatrice stood as if carved from ice. Valerie's hands trembled at her sides. Evan blinked but didn't move. They looked at me as though they'd never seen me before, because they hadn't. Not truly, not once. And I kept walking. I caught sight of Iris Quill near the back. Her expression unreadable, but her eyes sharp. She stepped forward slightly as I passed, her voice barely a whisper beneath the wind. "They never really knew you," she murmured. I didn't turn. My answer came quiet, steady, carried on breath alone. "Because they never wanted to." Her lips pressed into the faintest smile. And then she let me go. The distance between me and them widened with each step, not just in feet but in everything we had ever been. Every judgment, every silence, every time they had chosen to look through me instead of at me. The helicopter's door stood open, waiting. As I approached, Colonel Mercer shifted slightly, offering me a nod without breaking form. I returned it with the same quiet precision, not breaking stride. The rotors beat louder again, sending another gust rolling through the trees. The noise swallowed the last scattered voices, the rustle of silk and glass, and whispered disbelief. I stepped inside without glancing back. The door slid shut with the soft finality of a sealed chapter. And just like that, I disappeared from their world. Not as the disappointment they had sculpted in their minds, but as something else entirely. Outside the window, the figures on the lawn grew smaller, distant. The wind erased the last fragments of sound. I felt the lift as the helicopter rose, the shift of gravity as we cut through the sky. I exhaled slow and even. For the first time in 20 years, I wasn't running from them. I wasn't shrinking beneath their disdain. I wasn't fighting for space at a table that had never been mine. I was exactly where I chose to be, and I didn't look back. The flight back to Washington was silent. I sat rigid in the back of the transport, the soft hum of the engines filling the space around me. No words were exchanged. None were needed. The weight of the sealed dossier on my lap told me everything I needed to know. Something had unraveled, something big enough to summon me in front of hundreds of strangers, something that couldn't wait for morning. I didn't open the file until I reached the secure briefing room deep beneath the Pentagon. The walls there always seemed to hum low electric, like they held secrets too heavy for air to carry. Colonel Mercer slid the dossier across the steel table without ceremony. His face was stone. His voice was flat. Compromise. Multiple nodes. Possible internal exposure tied to Project Vanguard. I didn't blink. How bad? Worse than you think. I flipped open the first folder. Classified headers, satellite images, chain of custody logs, and then names. I froze. Evan Donovan, Valerie Donovan, and then almost surgically tucked into the lower corner, Beatrice Donovan. For a moment the room tilted slightly, my breath caught in my throat. Not from shock, but from the quiet devastation of something I had always feared, but never let myself name. Explain, I said. My voice calm, clipped. Mercer cleared his throat. 3 months ago, there was a breach in a defense subcontractor's server farm. Encrypted schematics for Vanguard drone intercept protocols were flagged as compromised. The breach vector was traced to private tech supplied by Donovan Dynamics, Evan Donovan's firm. Oversight connections tied to judicial approvals passed through a holding company linked to Valerie Donovan's legal network. And the funding trace leads to a legacy trust held by Beatrice Donovan. Ma'am, I raised a hand. I didn't need the rest. I understood. It wasn't just a security failure. It was systemic, rooted in power, influence, and greed. And it had my family's fingerprints all over it. The hum of the room sharpened into a thin line behind my eyes. Mercer spoke softly now. We don't believe it was intentional at first, but there's evidence of willful concealment once the breach was detected. Quiet payments, scrubbed emails, delayed responses to federal flags. In other words, they knew. I felt my pulse slow, not quicken. The colder part of me, the soldier, the tactician, took over. I flipped through each page without hesitation, without emotion. Data sets, transaction chains, legal memos, enough to bury careers, enough to trigger indictments. I paused on one particular document, an internal email exchange with Evan's CTO, casually dismissing a flagged security audit. The subject line read simply, "Non-issue handled internally." I closed the folder. My hands remained steady. I want full operational clearance on this, I said, quietly. Nothing moves without coming through me first. Mercer nodded once. Understood. But even as the words left my lips, something deeper twisted in my chest, something old and bitter. I had spent my life walking away from their world, believing that at least no matter how fractured, no matter how cold, they weren't corrupt. And now I knew. This wasn't just about family anymore. This was about national security, about choices that had spiraled so far beyond ambition that they had become dangerous. And I was the one who would have to bring it down. The thing is, I had seen the first crack 2 years ago. It came quietly the way most disasters do, not with alarms or headlines, but as a whisper buried in a routine briefing. At the time, I was stationed at Joint Base Andrews, overseeing cybersecurity threat assessments for civilian-military integration projects. A red flag appeared during a scheduled audit: anomalies in data packets routed through a commercial encryption provider. Minor, almost negligible. But something about the digital signature caught my eye. A familiar name buried deep in the metadata: Donovan Dynamics, Evan. I remember sitting at my desk that night, long after the building had emptied. The overhead lights flickered in that half-sleep state they fall into after hours. I stared at the screen, at the strands of code and connection points that, if followed, could lead to exposure not just for a company, but for a family. My family. I could have escalated it immediately. I should have. Instead, I closed the file. I didn't delete it. I didn't bury it. I just paused. I told myself it wasn't deliberate, that Evan couldn't possibly have known, that whatever vulnerability existed was surely an oversight, one that could be corrected quietly internally, without turning it into a spectacle that would stain every Donovan name for decades. I told myself I was protecting them. I told myself I was protecting the country from unnecessary chaos. I told myself silence could be noble. For weeks afterward, I monitored the system quietly, made a few calls under the radar, tightened protocols. I thought it was enough. I convinced myself it was enough. And when nothing catastrophic happened in the months that followed, I let it go. I buried it under layers of classified noise and the next crisis and the next deployment and the next casualty list. But the truth is, I chose silence. Not out of malice, not out of incompetence, but out of fear. Fear that bringing the truth into the light would destroy not just Evan, but Valerie and Beatrice, people I no longer loved in the way a daughter is supposed to, but who still somewhere deep inside me carried the weight of family, the pull of blood, the impossible knot of loyalty I had spent a lifetime trying to untangle. And now I knew I had been wrong, dead wrong. I stared at the dossier on the Pentagon table, the documents that laid bare the rot I had once tried to deny. The breach was no longer theoretical. The damage was no longer avoidable. People could have died because I chose to hesitate. People might still die. I closed my eyes, exhaled through my nose. I thought I whispered to no one that sometimes silence could save people. I opened my eyes again, sharper now. I was wrong. It wasn't just a personal failing. It was a professional one. The kind of mistake that reshapes lives, that stains everything it touches. And no amount of medals, no number of commendations could erase it. I knew what would come next. I knew the decisions ahead would cost me everything, not just their love, which I had lost long ago, but perhaps my career, my name, my peace. But I also knew this: I wouldn't choose silence again, not this time. I turned back to the task at hand, steadying my breath. Because sometimes the only way to fix what's broken is to shatter it completely. By dawn, I was handed the decision. Report it publicly, trigger a full-scale investigation, court-martial civilian indictments, or handle it quietly within the classified corridors of military intelligence, where it would be buried under layers of national security protocols and never see the light of public scrutiny. Both options led to destruction, one visible, one hidden. I sat alone in my secure office, the weight of the choice pressing against my ribs like iron. My fingertips hovered over the keyboard of the encrypted system. The cursor blinked, waiting. The room smelled of stale coffee and cold air. It was the kind of moment where no answer felt clean. A soft ping broke the silence. An incoming secure message. From Iris. I frowned. She shouldn't have had access to this line, but then again, I had underestimated her before. The message contained a single attachment, an image of an old internal university memo from Warrington's alumni office, time-stamped 11 years prior. The subject line was unmistakable: name removal request, Blair Donovan. My breath caught. I opened the file and read. It was a formal request submitted through back channels, signed by Beatrice Donovan herself, with additional signatures from Valerie and Evan. The wording was polite, clinical. In the interest of alumni brand integrity, we request the removal of Blair Donovan's name from all official donor walls, public communications, and historical displays. I sat back, my throat dry. They hadn't just distanced themselves. They had erased me, deliberately, systematically. My absence from family events hadn't been passive neglect, it had been active removal. A surgical extraction from memory, from history, from their version of truth. Another message from Iris appeared seconds later. Her words were simple. They rewrote you. Thought you should know before you decide. I closed my eyes. The choice before me, public exposure or quiet resolution, wasn't just professional now. It was personal in ways I hadn't fully understood until that moment. I thought of the little girl I used to be, walking these marble halls dreaming of belonging. I thought of the young cadet who made the impossible choice to serve. I thought of the soldier who came home to empty rooms, empty inboxes, and empty chairs at holidays. And now I thought of the woman I had become, carrying scars, carrying silence but not yet broken. I opened my eyes. Iris's message glowed on the screen. I straightened my spine and placed both palms flat on the desk. If they had rewritten me once, they would not do it again. I wouldn't choose silence this time, not for them, not for myself, and certainly not for the truth. It didn't take long for the world to notice. By morning, my face, one of the few official photos of me in uniform, was everywhere. The headlines split down the middle, each one louder than the last. Some called me the silent general, praising my career, my refusal to seek fame, my record of service unmarred by political ambition. Others twisted it, painting me as an opportunist who had engineered the reunion spectacle for personal redemption. They called me many things: a hero, a liar, a mystery, a fraud. Podcasts dissected the footage frame by frame, my expression as the helicopter landed, the precise wording of Colonel Mercer's salute. TikTok edits looped the moment with dramatic music overlays, each more absurd than the last. Hashtags exploded, per silent General Donovan scandal, erasure, hero or hoax. A late-night comedian quipped, either she's the most decorated general we've never heard of, or the best method actor since Meryl Streep. I watched it all from the stillness of my apartment in D.C., the glow of my encrypted laptop illuminating the dark. I said nothing publicly. I gave no interviews. But the noise grew louder, feeding on the vacuum I left. The praise felt as hollow as the criticism. I wasn't built for spectacle. My entire life had been forged in silence, in the weight of decisions made far from cameras and crowds. But now every version of me, crafted, distorted, celebrated, attacked, spun out of control. Somewhere in the blur, a single truth held steady. I couldn't control the narrative. But I could control what came next. The counterattack came swiftly. Valerie struck first, calculated as always. She appeared on a major news network within 48 hours, seated perfectly beneath soft studio lights. Her voice smooth, her tone carefully measured. My sister, she began, has chosen a life of secrecy. And while I respect her service, I do question the timing and nature of this sudden visibility. She framed it as concern, as heartbreak, as if she were the wounded sibling watching helplessly as I manipulated public sentiment for reasons she left carefully vague. She didn't need to spell it out. The seed was planted. The interviewer leaned in. Are you suggesting that General Donovan staged this appearance? Valerie gave a soft, almost pained smile. I'm not suggesting anything. I'm simply saying that narratives are powerful and we must be careful about the ones we elevate without question. The clip went viral before the segment even ended. Beatrice, in her usual fashion, remained silent. A few legacy media outlets tried to reach her for comment. None succeeded. She understood better than anyone the value of absence, how sometimes the refusal to speak shapes perception more sharply than any statement. Evan, for his part, went full denial. He released a short video, sleek, polished, undoubtedly prepared by his PR team, dismissing the security breach allegations as baseless and personally motivated. He didn't mention my name once. He didn't have to. The damage was done. Every media cycle twisted tighter. Some anchors praised me as a symbol of service over spectacle. Others painted me as a manipulator playing both sides. Even veterans groups divided, some rallying in support, others questioning the veracity of my sudden emergence after years of classified silence. The online fury was relentless. I scrolled through it in quiet detachment. Memes, mock-ups, speculative YouTube videos claiming I was part of the deep state, others framing me as a national treasure. My face became a brand overnight, and I hated every second of it. But what struck deeper, what cut beneath the noise, was that Valerie's words landed. People I had never met questioned my integrity. People I had once trusted sent guarded texts, some supportive, some distant. Iris Quill was one of the few who stayed close. She messaged me late that night. They're circling. You okay? I typed, then erased, then finally sent, I don't know. Because the truth was, I wasn't. I had expected backlash. I had even anticipated betrayal. But I hadn't expected the sheer velocity of it, the way decades of silence could be spun into suspicion, how even a life lived in shadow could be reframed as deceit. I closed the laptop. I sat in the dark for a long time. And I reminded myself, as I had done in deserts and bunkers and war rooms, you are not your headlines. And this wasn't over yet. The pressure closed in from every side. Anonymous threats flooded my inbox, some calling me a traitor, others hailing me as a hero. Old colleagues texted cautiously, offering neutral words that said everything and nothing. My chain of command remained publicly silent, but I could feel the shift beneath the surface. I knew the signals. I recognized the tightening of unseen levers, the careful distancing, the wait-and-see calculus. In the civilian world, the noise escalated. Talk shows ran competing narratives. Some pundits painted me as the embodiment of quiet patriotism, while others accused me of staging the entire scene to rehabilitate my family's name, or worse, launch a political career I didn't want and never asked for. I stopped reading the headlines. I stopped responding to messages. Iris was the only person I let through. She found me sitting alone on a park bench in the early morning fog just beyond the Pentagon's security perimeter. She sat down without a word, coffee in hand, her breath forming soft clouds in the cold air. For a while we said nothing. Then she asked gently, "Do you regret it?" Her voice carried no judgment, just curiosity, human curiosity. I didn't answer right away. I traced the rim of the coffee cup with my thumb, the cardboard still warm against my palms. The question echoed longer than I expected. Finally, I exhaled. I stayed silent, I said quietly, for years. Because I thought I was protecting something that mattered. I thought I was keeping the damage contained. I looked at her, my voice steady despite the weight inside my chest. Maybe I was wrong, I admitted. Maybe the silence did more harm than the truth ever could. Iris said nothing. She just waited. I turned back to the distant horizon, the slow pink wash of dawn creeping over the skyline. "But I'm still here," I said softly. "And as long as I'm breathing, I can fix what I failed to face." The words hung between us, unfinished, imperfect, but true. I didn't expect absolution. I didn't expect the world to forgive or the noise to fade. The controversy would grow. The accusations would spiral. I knew that. But I also knew this silence may have been my first mistake. It wouldn't be my last. I returned to Warrington on a quiet morning. No cameras, no podiums, no ceremony. The campus looked the same as it always had, the ivy crawling up sandstone walls, the clock tower chiming the hour, the old oak trees standing sentry over manicured lawns. Students drifted between classes, some laughing, some lost in headphones. Life moved on untouched by the storm that had raged in the outside world. I walked the familiar path alone. Near the central quadrangle stood the Hall of Legacy, a modest corridor framed by bronze plaques, honoring alumni whose names had shaped history in law, politics, science. I knew this place well. I had walked past it hundreds of times, as a student, always invisible, always lesser in the eyes of those who believed legacy was something inherited, not earned. But now something had changed. At the far end of the hall, beneath soft morning light filtering through stained glass, there was a new plaque. I paused in front of it, my breath catching quietly in my throat. The inscription read, "Lieutenant General Blair Donovan, Leadership in Silence. Service without applause, no embellishment, no grandiosity, just truth. Just enough." I stood there for a long moment, my fingertips brushing the cool metal. I didn't need fanfare. I didn't need applause. But something about the weight of those words, the simple acknowledgement, settled into me like breath after surfacing from deep water. It wasn't vindication. It wasn't revenge. It was something quieter, something steadier. A return, but on my own terms. I turned slightly as footsteps approached. It was Iris, dressed in her usual understated way, a gentle smile on her lips. She didn't speak at first. She just stood beside me, her gaze resting on the plaque. "About time," she murmured eventually. I smiled faintly. "It's just a plaque." She shook her head. "It's more than that. You know it." Maybe I did. But in that moment, I also knew this: the legacy I carried wasn't made of metal or marble. It was built in the shadows, in choices no one saw, in sacrifices that left no headlines, and that was enough for me. The letter arrived a week later, handwritten, no return address. The envelope bore my name in looping, careful script I hadn't seen in years. My heart hesitated when I saw it, my breath pausing in that quiet way you can't control. I knew it was from her before I even touched the paper. I sat at my kitchen table, the morning light soft against the windows, and opened it without ceremony. The paper trembled slightly in my hands, but not from nerves, from memory. Beatrice Donovan's handwriting had always been immaculate. The letter was short. "Blair, there are no words I can offer that will make this right. I spent years teaching you that legacy was something fragile, something that could shatter with a single wrong choice. What I never admitted, not even to myself, was that I feared truth more than I feared failure. I see now that you didn't fail us. We failed you. I don't ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I needed you to know I was wrong. Your mother, Beatrice." I sat in silence for a long time after reading it. The words weren't perfect. They weren't grand gestures. But they were honest, or as close to honest as she was capable of. I felt no triumph reading them. No surge of righteousness, just something softer, something tired. The slow, quiet closing of a door that had remained ajar far too long. I folded the letter neatly and set it aside. I didn't write back. Not because I was angry, because I wasn't. Not anymore. I thought about all the versions of myself that had carried this weight, the girl desperate to belong, the soldier numbed by loss, the woman forged in silence. Each one had been shaped by her absence, her judgment, her control. But now I was free. I stepped outside into the crisp air, the letter still tucked in my pocket, and felt the weight of it fade. Forgiveness didn't need permission. It simply required release, and I was ready to let go. I found myself where I never expected to return: a classroom. Fort Liberty, the training ground for the next generation of officers, strategists, quiet protectors. I stood at the front of a modest lecture hall. Cream walls, rows of uniformed cadets, barely old enough to carry the weight they were preparing for. They looked at me not with awe, not with fear, but with that sharp, searching focus that told me they were paying attention. Really paying attention. I cleared my throat, resting my hands lightly on the worn wooden podium. Leadership. I began, my voice even steady, is not about applause. A few pens scratched across notebooks. No one shifted. No one whispered. Sometimes I continued: the right thing to do will be invisible. Sometimes the people around you won't see it. They won't thank you. They might even condemn you for it. And you'll have to do it anyway. I paused, letting the words settle. In this profession, there's no scoreboard, I said softly. No grand finale. Just moments. Split seconds where you choose to act or not. And often no one will ever know the difference. I could see it in their faces, some nodding slightly, some still processing. I knew the feeling. I had sat where they sat once. I told them about mistakes, not with specifics. Never with details I couldn't share, but with truth. I told them about the cost of silence, the weight of decisions made in shadows, the importance of standing for something even when no one was watching. When the class ended, they filed out quietly. One cadet lingered, hesitating before she spoke. "Ma'am, do you ever regret it?" I smiled softly. "Some days, but then I remember regret fades. Cowardice doesn't." She nodded. I watched her go, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something close to peace. It was Iris who brought the idea. She caught me after a session one afternoon, her coat slung over one arm, her eyes lit with something fierce but gentle. "You should tell it," she said. I raised an eyebrow. "Tell what? Your story," she said simply. "But your way. No headlines, no spin." I laughed under my breath. "I don't need a memoir," she shrugged. "Maybe not. But someone does. Someone out there who feels erased, forgotten. You said it yourself, leadership isn't about applause. But sometimes stories help others find their own voice." I studied her for a moment. I thought about the cadets, about the girl who'd asked about regret, about the letters, the silence, the noise. I nodded slowly. "I'll do it," I said. "But no gloss, no embellishments." Iris smiled. "Wouldn't expect anything less." We agreed to start slowly, no publishers yet. Just pages. Truth first, then everything else. Weeks passed. One morning, I walked through the rows of trees on the edge of base, crimson leaves falling soft against the stone path. The air smelled of cedar and cold. My boots crunched lightly against gravel. I thought about everything we'd built and broken. About silence and forgiveness. About the cost of choosing to stand alone and the grace of finding your way back. And somewhere deep inside, I felt it: not pride, not triumph, just steadiness. I didn't need them to speak my name. I just needed to never forget who I was. Before we say goodbye, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee, or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to this channel, not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, in healing, and in second chances. Thank you for sharing your time with us today. Wherever you are, I hope you carry this story with you. And remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care, and I'll see you in the next story.